So let's get into the data collected, right? So for end of year one, there's 5 files specific to the data. There's the student enrollment, right? That allows you to establish ownership, submit records for the student. It's not strictly required, although there are indicators in the enrollment file for the CCI. Typically, we associate the exiting of 12th graders that are going to use those indicators with end of year three, but they do come from the student enrollment. Then you have your staff demographics. In terms of end of year one, your staff demographics is only needed to be updated in case a teacher changed, right? You're submitting courses for the entire academic year. Staff goes on leave. You've reported this change in your SIS. When you submit those records to CalPADS, the courses might have a seed number that wasn't previously reported. So you just want to update your staff demographic. We don't use staff demographics for anything. There is no assignment monitoring. It doesn't matter. It's not urgent. So if you have a contractor that came in or a substitute and you don't have their information, it's perfectly fine to submit the course record, which is required with the seed 999, the generic seed. There are no assignment monitoring implications with end of year one. You need to submit your courses for every official grading period, right? So if you have 4 quarters, you have to submit all 4 quarters. If you have 2 semesters, you submit 2 semesters. If you have trimesters, we want all 3. And then we want those student grades, the student course completion. The student course completion file is the same as the student enrollment, but there's additional fields that show the outcomes. We'll talk about that when we dive into that. But we want the student course section completion for all official grading periods to go with the course section enrollment. And then those students who have completed a CTE program or pathway, these don't have to be 12th grade students. The year they complete their capstone course, you should be submitting the SCTE record, identify them as a pathway completer. And then the work-based learning. The work-based learning, you're submitting what the student completed this year, right? The hours, what work-based learning type they were engaged and participated in, that information. Then the staff involved, of course, you want the CTE staff, site staff, program staff, site administrators, the usual suspect, student support staff. You want the investment if you're at a district of the schools. If you're at a charter, you want an investment of the teachers, right? You want student level detail. You want it to be accurate. And so you want them to be updating the SIS as often as possible. All of this we'll talk about here shortly as individual file types. And then the record relationships. So you can see they're labeled, right? In purple or indigo, whatever bluish color this is, you have your student enrollment. And we need that for ownership. That will allow us to submit the work-based learning file, right? And the student course section completion file. All right, so the work-based learning and the student course section completion have to be at the school the student attended in the academic year. And then as far as your other files, you have your staff demographic. That provides us the seed. That will allow us to submit the course records. And that's the only reason why we need to update the staff demographic is we need the information from the course section. Once the course section is submitted, we can submit the student course section completion. That's linking the students' results or accomplishments to their coursework or to the course offered. And then the student career technical education, that pathway, that completed pathway that we are saying the student completed in that file, the capstone course has to be reported in that course section completion. So those are the relationships and recommended order of submission. Of course, CalPADS will allow you to submit all the files at once or in any order, but as you're resolving DDs and trying to be efficient, we believe this is the most efficient and logical order. And so I believe Kyron added this slide, and I think the key takeaway from this is end of year one benefits grades 9 through 12. It's permissible. You have P's here for grades 7 and 8, but there really is no value for grades 7 and 8, right? Your students aren't going to be counted in the CCI. That's for 12th grade completers and graduates. And CCI is the main product, right? If you have a CTE course or you got Carl Perkins funding, it could benefit you, right? But primarily grades 9 through 12, it's required for and it benefit. And so a lot of times you can submit this information. Maybe in future years it will be pertinent. But as of now, if you have 7th and 8th grades, it's not strictly required. All right. But if you have 9 through 12, those grades are the data is required for. All right. And so, as a reminder, kind of alluded to it, you cannot submit data for grades K through 6. We don't want self contained classes at all. Like if you submit a course 1000, regardless of grade, we don't want that, right? We only want 7 through 12 departmentalized courses, with 7 and 8 being optional. Required is grade 9 through 12 departmentalized courses. Again, to reiterate, you can have state course code 1000. And if you have independent study, this is really who it affects, right? And fall 2, a lot of times for ease of reporting, we're in the habit of reporting independent study of 1000. But to show what the students accomplished in end of year 1, it's best to submit their individual subjects as departmentalized courses. That generally translates into more work for you or whoever manages the student information system, but it doesn't benefit the LEA or the student not to show what they accomplished in end of year 1. And then the SCTE pathway is only for completers, grades 9 through 12, for those who have completed a pathway. We don't wait until the 12th grade year to report this. If they complete a pathway in the 10th grade or 11th grade, you report it in the year they complete it. Aaron will talk about that in more detail. All right, so we're ready for course completion. So we have our course attributes, right? The course content is linked to the state course code. So every state course code has a definition in the code set. The definition provides you the content of the course, right? Same with fall 2, you're mapping the content of the course to the state course code. That's where course completion comes in, right? You're linking your courses. So leadership, military science, your college courses, your CTE courses, all are indicated through your state course code, right? So that's one of the reasons why you have to submit that course completion file. And then your high quality CTE courses, they're going to be taught by CTE credentialed teachers and indicated in your course file, right? So you're setting up your curriculum. Your college courses, they're either going to be through a designated state course code, or they're going to be a CTE college course and have the non-standard instructional level code of 23 or 24, right? So again, if you have college courses, you have dual enrollment students, you have to report them with a specific state course code. It'll say math college credit, science college credit, art college credit other. And then if it's a CTE college course, you're going to use the normal CTE state course code between 7,000 and 8,999, but the non-standard instructional level code has to be populated. And then you have your CTE attributes. So the additional fields required of CTE courses have to be reported. That's normal. Whether it's a articulated CTE course or what have you, once you use the CTE state course code, those fields have to be populated as well. And so we have the screenshot, which, I would prefer to have logged into CalPads and walked you through this, but like I said, I was having trouble with the VPN this morning. On the left here, we have the course information, right? This is your course content. It's coming as identified through the state course code field. And in fall 2, the standards and all that is important, not for end of year 1, right? We're really looking at the state course code. And if it's a CTE course, the CRSE CTE post-secondary articulated course indicator. That's all we really want from the basic course information. Now, if it's a file, all this is in one, but the online view, you can see the breakdown. So coming down to the course section information, the course instructional level code. So if it's a CTE course, you could have a 23 or 24 dual credit or college enrollment. That's how you identify a CTE state course code. You can see in the example, we have a seed 999, right? It's a generic seed. Again, for end of year 1, the use of generic seed is not frowned upon. It has no impact. We're not looking at staff data at all. So it's fine to use it if you need to. You see a lot of fields are left blank that we don't need, right? They're used for assignment monitoring. We don't need them. Yesterday I had a ticket. They asked was a local assignment option code needed for dual enrollment. Absolutely not. You see it's blank here. We don't need it. We would like the APIB course indicator cross-reference to be populated only if you have a CTE state course code populated and it's also APIB. That's the only time this field can be used is for a CTE course that is also APIB. We would want that populated then. But that's going to be the sum total of the data, right? It's really your state course code, your non-standard instructional level code, your APIB course code cross-reference. That's the information that we're going to be using from the course file. And so when you think about your college courses, when I was saying college credit, these are the title of every course. So I always say your student could be taking calculus in college. We don't care. It's college math. It doesn't matter if it's differential equations, any type of math in college they may be taking. It's going to be 9273. It doesn't matter what science they're taking. It's 9358. It's imperative that you code it with the college credit course for the CCI. And then any CTE state course code has to have a 23 or a 24. When we're going back to dual credit, you see it's highlighted here. It has to be 23 or 24 if it's a CTE course from 7,000 to 899. And then this is identifying that there's state course code for your AP courses. There's state course codes for your IB courses as well. That's how you would report them. Your CTE courses, they have to have the CTE state course code, the CTE post-secondary articulated reported, so those additional CTE fields. Course section providers not required anymore. And then if it's a high quality CTE in the course, yes or no. We'll reference this again when we're looking at our reports. So you have three fields for CTE courses: your state course code, your post-secondary articulated course indicator, whether or not you have an agreement with a local higher education institution, and then the high quality CTE course indicator. Although highlighted, the provider code is no longer required. And then we're showing you the cross-reference for a CTE course here. So if you have a CTE state course and the APIB course populated. And then the student course section. So your course completion is only reported when those two files are submitted, the course and the student course section. Think about student incidents where we have three files. You have your sync, which is your incident information, your results. You need both of those two files, right, to have a record. The same thing with the course completion and student course section completion. We use the term course completion for the course file, but also in general as a data type. So that to have that actual data for course completion, you need those two files. Once you populate the outcomes for the students in those courses, which is the student course section completion file, where we get the grades, the credits, the Carnegie units, we're done, right? You have the course and the outcome, and only file left at that point is the SCTE for your CTE completers. And so the attributes that are important from the student course section completion, of course, are their grades. We don't report this in fall two at all, but for end of year one, it's imperative. We will take any alphanumeric character. It's limited to 3 characters. So if you have a non-standard grading system, there's no limitations there. Your credits, you report the credits the students earned. These credits are reflective of your grading system. And then the Carnegie units, which is universal, they usually approximate to 120 hours of one course over the course of a year. I believe typically one Carnegie unit is usually equivalent to 10 credits. So if you're familiar with semesters, typically one semester long class gives you 5 credits. That would be usually half a Carnegie unit. And when, like English or math, you take it in first and second semester, You have 10 credits of Algebra 1, you'd have one full Carnegie unit. That's typically how it goes. The vendors calculate this from your system. And then you also have to indicate whether or not the courses meet UC CSU requirements in the course section. So you're going to indicate, did the course meet a UC CSU requirement A through G? And so again, this is a CalPADS view of the student course section. We have the academic term code. So when you think of the CCI, this California School Dashboard, sometimes multiple terms are required, and the difference between being prepared and approaching prepared. But also, this is a key field in which you have to map your student course section to the course section, right? They have to have this grade has to match a course offered in S2. Your student credits completed, like it's a funny example, it's 3, but you report the student's credits attempted and they earn. So typically, if a student passes a class, they get all the credits attempted. And then your student information systems. This is pretty much automatic. Your final grade examples in this one, the student has an A. The UCCSU requirement for the course, if it meets one, it would be your A through G requirements, and then how many Carnegie units the student earned for completing the course, right? So it's usually 1, half, or 0, and the marking period code, which is used for mapping this student's results to the course they took. Alrighty then, this is our transition point.
All right. So Nate discussed the STEM, CRSC, and SSC requirements, which are the basic building blocks for end of year one. However, for LEAs who maintain, who has high schools and maintain a CTE pathway program, these LEAs are required to submit or expected to submit the Student Career Technical Education file or SCTE file. So this is just for schools who either are high schools and also are receiving CTEIG or Perkins funding because the expectation is you are maintaining a program, CTE program at the school. Okay. So let's discuss the details of the CTE first. Again, who should be reported? Again, students who have completed a CTE pathway during the current reporting year are included on the SCTE file. You can report a student who completed, of course, if a student has completed more than one pathway during the reporting year, you can report multiple CTE records in CalPADS. And then CTE participants who are non-completers must not be included in the SCTE file. So the takeaway here is that you only report SCTE records for students who completed the capstone course in the current academic year. Because the expectation is a student should follow a step ladder approach in terms of taking the different courses within a pathway program, right? So if a student follows the correct sequence of classes, then the student should also have, aside from the SCTE record, claiming that the student is a completer for a specific pathway, the student should also have the SCSC record, as Nate mentioned earlier, with that is associated to the capstone course that reflects that the student completed that specific pathway program in the current year. You can report an SCTE record if a student completed the capstone course last year and then finished the middle course or concentrator course this year. If a student followed the wrong sequence, then you would still need to report the SCSC record in the year that you claim the student to be a pathway completer, right? Okay, so what are the SCTE data being collected? Number one, you have the complete CT completer info, which is essentially just student demographics, the SCSC record. that shows that the student was in a SCSE capstone course, right? But that's on the SCSE side. But on the CTE side, the first one here, which says identify students who has completed a minimum of 300 hours. This is not part of the actual file, but it is implied that if a student completed the specific, courses, then they are expected to be a CTE completer. There is a move this year wherein the 300-hour requirement may be eliminated. So this might be implemented next year, but wherein the new definition might be as long as you complete the entire course sequence and the capstone course has a C minus or better, then they are technically a CTE completer. But that's, getting ahead. If you want more details on that plan, you will need to attend the CDE's regional CALPADS regional meeting because they will present that information during that meeting. So again, you need to report the specific CTE pathway that the student completed, and then it should be in the current academic year. Okay, you can. So if it's 24-25, then obviously the academic year should be this year. You can report a 23, 23-24, because CalPAS won't pick it up on the reports. Right. So there are two different subgroups of CTE participants. So you have your CTE participant, which is anyone who completed a CTE course. So regardless if they are in a pathway program or not, if a student is completed a CTE course, maybe just as part of their elective, or if it's part of their CTE pathway program, then they are considered a participant. Now, the distinction now between a completer and a non-completer is that a non-completer, you only report the CRSC and SCSC records of those students, while a CTE completer needs to have the CRSC, SCSC, and the SCTE record. So for non-completers, this could be anyone who, again, completed a CTE course in the current reporting period. It might even be the capstone course that they took as an elective. So, however, if they are not part of a CTE pathway and they haven't completed the CTE pathway program, then you don't submit a SCTE record. So now, within that CTE participant subgroup is your CTE completers, designated by the reporting of, again, the three end-of-year files. So the assumption here is that if you submit the SCTE record, the student completed the entire sequence of courses within a pathway and successfully passed the capstone course with a C minus or better in the current academic year. So again, this is just a visualization of how CalPAS determine a CTE completer based on the data that you submit to us, right? So for CTE participants, so as long as you have a CTE course between 7,000 to 899 and the student completed that course in this year and you do not submit the SCTE, that student is considered as a CTE participant or non-completer. And they are reflected in, I believe, report 15.14 and 15.15, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, you have your CT pathway completers, which has the capstone course reported. And then you have the SCSC record, which will reflect the C minus or better grade. And then, of course, you have the SCTE, which would reflect the specific pathway code that is associated to this capstone course. And then the academic year ID, which is basically this current year. So Nate alluded to the valid code combinations document. So again, the valid code combinations document is a vital resource material for end of year one. Why? It includes all of the essential data for related to courses, to CTE, and the essential designations for a course. Okay, so let me just demo to you what the valid code combinations looks like. Okay, so where do we download this document? For those who are new, you could download it from the bottom of CalPads over here, from the system documentation in the CalPads website, and from the user manual. If you just go to resource and then references, it should be here too. So there are different ways to access this document. So when reporting CTE completers or CTE records, obviously you just have to go to course group master combo. If I right click on this and I go to course group master combos, you would see this file. Let me just increase the page. So first of all, you have to filter for only those active records this year. Oh, my bad. NA, right? And then, as you can see, you have all of these courses, right? So now, you also have to filter for the industry sector because this will identify if a course is a CTE course or not. So we just take out NA, and now you have this specific SCTE courses. Okay, as you can see, the CTE has an industry code which represents the appropriate or industry that each state course code is associated to and the pathway that it's associated to, right? So again, when maybe this too late for you to know this, but if you want to map out courses specific to CTE, you have to refer to this as well as the CTE user guide, right? So the CTE user guide provides you all of the different pathways with a different pathway number. And if you look at one pathway here, it then provides you the specific courses that is associated to that pathway. Okay. So you have Agri as the intro, you have Concentrator, which is the middle course, and Capstone course. So the expectation is your counselors should be able to know or should be able to enroll students in the right sequence if they are part of a pathway program. Okay. That way, it's easier for you to report the data because once the student finishes the capstone course, then obviously you would be able to generate the SCTE record at the same time that you report the SCSC record of that student finishing that capstone course. However, I'm just sharing this with you just so you know where the resources are, right? But as a CalPADS administrator, this is not your responsibility to create courses to determine what courses should be assigned to a pathway. This is your curriculum specialist job as well as your counselor's job. Okay, so let's go back here. So in the valid code combinations document, so you have here the course group master combo, okay, and then the CT sub pathway. So when you report a CTE completer, you have to account for three things. Number one, you should have a CRSC record representing the state course code of the capstone course. Number two, the student must be enrolled to that course and completes the course with a C minus or better, right? And so you report the SCSC record of that student. And then number three, you submit the CTE record showing that the student is in the specific pathway and then in the current year's pathway. So this is an old screenshot, but I hope you understand the requirements. So let's go again to the valid code combinations and look at pathway 111 as this document represents. So if we filter pathway 111, so you have here two sets of pathways. You have Although you have a CTE pathway of 111, sometimes you also have a sub pathway, right? There's more advanced pathway or sub, which represents the different sets of art and media sector pathway codes. So if we go to the document that I mentioned, 111, let's just go back to that. 111. So each pathway has a sub pathway. You can have this course set, concentrator capstone. You have another one here, which is 7214 and 7215. And then you have 7217 and 7218. So all of these are specific to a pathway 111. However, you just have to make sure that you are reporting the correct state course code for that specific class, right? Or content. So again, when you report a CTE completer, you report the capstone course. So you can filter from the valid code combinations document the capstone courses. So these are the expected CRSC record reported in CalPads, and of course the SCSC record where the student should be getting a C or minus or better. That is reported in CalPads as well. So 7212, 7215, and 7218. So if one of these are missing, so let's say if you report the if one of these conditions are missing, then the student won't be accounted as a CT pathway completer this year. So you have to have the CRSC, SCSC, and the CTE pathway record. Now, if you report the student as a CTE completer and it turns out the student did not complete the 7212 capstone course, then obviously you would get an error in CalPads. Sometimes you would tell us that the student submitted the pathway, and then you have here a capstone course. However, it turns out the student is only completed the capstone course because it was an elective. Then, by all means, you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, so it should only be the SCTE record should only be reported for students who are in a pathway program. And so here's a representation of how a non-completer is. So again, you have the state course code for a non-capstone course. So you have 7 to 10 and 7 to 11. Any course reported this year for a student, I mean, if the student completed any of these courses, 7 to 10 and 7 to 11 this year, then they are considered a non-completer participant. Now, if you report a 70 to 10, 7 to 11, and then an SCTE record, CalPAS will not like that as well because CalPAS will only look for a capstone course if you report an SCTE record. So let's move on to the next one, which is work-based learning. For work-based learning, this is an expectation for, again, LAAs who have high school students, right? This is for grades 9 to 12 to demonstrate their preparedness for CCI and to meet the California School Dashboard. So if you have any work-based learning program within your school, then by all means report the work-based learning file to CalPads. And that way we will know that the student is in a work-based learning environment. Okay, so there are 12 work-based learning program activities that LA should track and report to CalPAS on the WBLR file. So there are two specific programs that may involve special education students. And so if you have those, please be aware to report them as well to CalPADS. So what are the wobbler data being collected? Okay, so LAs are required to submit work-based learning completion information for all students that complete an internship, and it includes all work-based learning completion for students enrolled at any time during the reporting year. And of course, this data will come from the CTE, SPED, and CALPADS coordinators. So for the CTE, this would come from your SIS. For SPED, you have to coordinate with your special education system if you have students who are in one of the two work-based learning programs that needs to be reported. So for Wobbler, again, you need to have the WBLR edit and view and extract roles to be able to submit data, review a WBLR record, as well as extract a file from CalPads. Okay. And for CELPAS, if they need to download a copy of the Wobbler, then CELPAS will need to request the LEA to add an LEA level account to be able to download the WBLR extract. So additional references can be downloaded from the Flash page that Nate mentioned earlier. So look for Flash 184 and 229. And of course, the user manual. So what's the takeaway here though? So for work-based learning types, so these are all of the codes that I mentioned. So you have internship, student-led enterprise, virtual simulated work-based learning, then apprenticeship, job corps workforce, youth build, California Conservation Corps, and then of course you have your two SPED related work-based experience. This is for your transitional students. So you have your transition work-based experience and transition classroom-based work exploration, right? So the important thing you need to know is that this work-based learning should be tied to a course, okay? Should be tied to a class. Any student who is in an internship or work-based learning should be tied to a class that enforces that type of work, right? So if you, normally it's a CTE course or that involves that, right? And so, however, you have to just understand that any work-related job that the student or work-related experience that the student is in shouldn't be reported, right? It should be specific to a class. So if a student just goes out of school for a few hours for work at McDonald's and it's not part of a school based program and the student is not part in a course that endorses that, then of course you shouldn't be reporting that as a work-based learning experience. Right, so what are the data fields required here? Of course, you have your learning type code, the internship ID, and the work-based learning hours external. So and then of course your state course code, which is again associated to that work base. So as I've mentioned, so if you have a course that if there is a program for chefs, right? So a student goes to an internship at probably a restaurant, then you can report that as long as it's within the school's program, and then you then report the CTE course here that probably culinary related that is tied to that internship. And then, of course, you have your internship employer performance evaluation code, which is not required, but if the employer provides performance evaluation, then you can indicate that as well here. And then you also indicate if the internship has a certificated supervisor, and then if the internship has an LA sponsored indicator. Okay? If the internship is if the district or school or county played a direct role in securing the internship of the student. And then, of course, this is not new anymore, but again, just a reminder, if the employer evaluation code was not populated or if the internship does not provide an evaluation, just put a code 5 in there. That way there is a value in the record because it's a required field. Actually now it's a required field, so just indicate a 5. And then of course you have we're retiring the non-registered pre-apprenticeship program. So again, just these are the only program type codes that are expected this year. All right, so before we go on a break, let's just do a checklist, make sure that all reportable courses are mapped to the state course codes. Obviously, we're at the end of the year. However, if there are any codes within your system that are not properly mapped, meaning you have your caption courses, you have any caption course associated to a pathway, make sure all of those are configured into your SIS system. Then, obviously, here are the required fields for courses. You have your content subcategory, your standard grade range. So it's a little bit tricky when you report CTE courses. Please be aware that I'm not sure if this is not a required field anymore this year, I guess, for CTE. So make sure if it's a 7,000 to 899 to leave that field blank. Okay, now if it's a college course, then obviously you still have to report the standard grade range for that. And then, of course, alongside the grade range is your content standards alignment code, telling us if the course is meeting the current standards or the old standards. Then your school core, if it's a yes or no indicator, and then APIB course code cross-reference if needed. If you have CTE courses that all is also part of an AP or IB, then indicate that in here in the course. And then don't worry about Carnegie units. Your SIS will automatically compute the values for you. So as long as you have the student in that course and completing a course, then of course your SIS will provide the value for that. Then number four, the following have been identified and reported in the SIS. Obviously, make sure that you have your CTE completers reported, your students who completed leadership and military science courses, students who received seal of bioliteracy and or golden state seal, any students completing college credit courses. Nate explained to you how to indicate college and credit courses. Then, of course, your work-based learning types. All of these are essential in the CCI and California dashboard. So just a reminder for WBLR internships, type 10, you also have to, again, report internship ID, work-based learning hours, employer performance evaluation code. If there is no performance evaluation, mark it as a 5, and then make sure that you indicate a yes or no for LA sponsored indicator as well as the certificated supervisor indicator. And then for special ed, in addition to WBLR, type 15 and 20, you also have to report the work-based learning hours and the state course code. Okay, now this for the simulated one. And then, of course, if you report a WBLR for transition students for the transition-based type code, it is expected that the student has an active special education status in CALPADS. So if the student move from one district to another, be sure to report the special ed required information as well.
You have completed this module. Please continue to the next video. Thank you.